I've got all sorts of goodies for you. And I'm just like looking around this like small warehouse, like, I think I'm good as long as I can leave here safely, which always good.
That's one way to get paid, I guess. It's actually a good topic. I'm in this personal boat where I just don't think that focusing every hand really matters that much unless you're one of these kinds of people that if you don't focus on something, you're gonna now not be able to adjust when it's really hard for you to to shift tasks or something like that. I can see that, but I don't think that you really gain enough EV by looking at opponents and things like that, watching the hands and stuff like that, or like
I
paying attention to their.
Yeah. There's diminishing returns. So if you're entering, the NFL, the importance of studying film for a rookie is just very different from a 10-year veteran. The 10-year veteran should still put some work in, but the rookie has so much more to pick up. So people who are new to playing live tournaments, if they can, manage it, yeah, they should pay attention to everything and try to acquire some experience in terms of understanding, connecting different variables that are a little more second nature to someone who's been doing it for 10, 20 years.
That's a good point. Um, yeah, that's a good point. I mean, also it'll be a bit more interesting for them too, because it's
Yeah.
not so interesting personally when I'm playing. It's a little bit slow in comparison to the 4+ tables online or whatever it is. I do think it's really important in certain situations to watch people's emotional states, and sometimes certain hands can have massive effects on the way people play the next few hands. But you don't really need to know too much detail to capture these sorts of emotional shifts. And it's more specifically true in like cash game environments and I don't. It's sometimes true in tournaments. The psychology of what happens in hands, I think, can matter a lot in tournaments, just because that is something that can be very, very difficult um, to become stoic about. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think you do your best to quantify these things and the emotional state. If you're talking about a high stakes cash game, especially some of the private games, there are guys who are completely locked up after they're up a significant amount of big blinds, and other guys who might go even crazier once they're up 600 big blinds. And so, knowing that about an opponent, watching their emotional state, tracking how they respond to wins, losses, a bluff shown their way, is hugely important. It's not to say that it doesn't exist in tournaments. I think you want to spend more of your bandwidth focusing on the players you don't know, and especially the ones that you don't think are professionals, because there's a greater spectrum or a wider spectrum of possibilities from those players than from a seasoned pro. But again, quantifying it, it's not to say that focusing isn't going to be beneficial. It's how much benefit is there. So if you're talking about, say, a 10K at the Poker Go studio and you think you have a 14 ROI, and you think that tuning out and listening to music and taking care of emails on your phone brings you from 14 to 9, then okay, you have lost $500 in this, guesstimated equation over the course of X number of hours, and you decide what that means to you.
That's a good way of putting it. It'd be. I don't know how to actually estimate it. I don't know that it really costs $500. I'm thinking like, if are we comparing focusing every single hand and on what every single player is doing versus like being on your phone and like not doing all of that? Are we comparing those two things?
I think so, but it also is player to player. If you take someone like a Chance Corneth is very sensitive to the vibe, and he's willing to adjust in a much, greater manner than a lot of other players. So it's probably more important that he really focuses. Whereas someone who is not going to adjust as much, the focus is not going to bring the same returns for them. So I think there's that. But I think even if the numbers are very big. Like say 14 to 9 is a very reasonable guesstimate for a player. There's an unseen cost, which is whenever you focus really hard for a long number of hours, that's costing you on the back end in one way or another. It's tends to be a little bit draining. And then if you go home and you have a family or anyone that you're hanging out with, you might be more drained and you're going to give everyone and everything else in your life a little bit less. I think when you can take care of errands on your phone, as I sometimes do when I'm playing in a lower buy-in tournament, and take care of, like catching up on socializing or whatever it is that, may need to be checked off, you have a little bit more to give to the other things in your life later on.
Yeah, that's a fair point. There's often lots of hidden costs to a lot of different things. People don't assess things in a a truly uh, what's the word? The full picture kind of way would be the way of looking at it. There is what you're referring to is that willpower does have a limit to it. There's this idea that willpower just is like a battery or something that doesn't have an infinite like it's like something that has just finite storage to it, and the more you exhaust it, the more you use it, the more you have to get it from, the more you have to recharge it or whatever it is. Um, Actually, one situation that people don't think about in poker is when you get into a lot of these like private games, etc. They often don't think about the adding. It's on the topic of a full of like not looking things at the full picture, but the topic of like not getting paid, that being some kind of percent, and not factor that in overall to the bottom line and that sort of thing. Yeah, getting cheated as well. I find getting cheated is a little bit easier to predict, but not getting paid, especially in these kinds of things, like no one ever really considers how those things affect the bottom line. But it is nice that in tournaments you always get paid. So then the usual model that people have to look at whether to look at what their ROI is actually works really well for tournaments, but doesn't always work really well for live cash games. So I thought I'd throw that out there just because it's really easy to forget these kinds of details when looking at like how profitable or not profitable something is.
Yeah, yeah, there are outliers that add up. I can remember back in the day, somebody I was backing had a good opportunity to play a private underground game in New York City. And one of the questions I asked him is, what percent do you think it gets robbed? Not because that simply being a number means you can't play, but let's count that into our, equation of how much money are you making? Because if the margins are really small and we think that you're 2% to not get paid and 1% that this is a setup and you're going to get robbed, and another 1 in 1,000 that you might get harmed, this is starting to not look so good, even if it was, let's say, predicted to be 4x your normal hourly.
Yeah, it's a weird situation. Sure, how much
Yes.
money is it that it costs you to risk getting robbed?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I grew up playing in a game where I was 17 and we had a security guard at the door who he was armed and they were, I didn't even
Whoa.
drink and people were doing lines at the table. It was when we were basically in a fell off the truck store where it was like after you're getting paid out and I'd be like, they're paying me out 8,500 in winnings. I'm all excited and they're like, hey, do you want a speaker? Do you want a gold necklace? Like, basically you can give back like 2 grand and I've got all sorts of goodies for you. And I'm just like looking around this like small warehouse, like, I think I'm good as long as I can leave here safely, which always good.
That's one way to get paid, I guess.
Yeah.
um,